I'd like to welcome everyone to the February 6, 2023 podcast from Pennsylvania Pardon Services, doing business as recorderacer.net. This segment is relatively short, but I'd like to do an update about the Board of Pardons. Some of this has been covered before, but some of it's fresh. The Board of Pardons did want to release an online portal where people can upload their own pardon applications, and that was originally scheduled for release January 9th. That has been pushed back, and now what we're told is that it will be released later this quarter. So as I said, today's February 6th. I'm anticipating by the end of March, or else I'll keep you posted. Also was pleased to announce that at the end of the year, or actually in January, Wolf granted 369 newly issued pardons, most of which were from the marijuana pardon project in September of last year, where people could ask for their own misdemeanor marijuana pardons. So those 369 brought Governor Wolf's total to 2,540 pardons that he issued during his 8 years in office as governor. And so now Governor Wolf is no longer the governor. Attorney General Shapiro was elected as Pennsylvania's new governor. And so the lieutenant governor is Austin Davis, and he, sitting as lieutenant governor, will be on the Board of Pardons and chairing the Board of Pardons. So I look forward to seeing him learn his new duties and job description and sitting in on the board. Also, because Attorney General Shapiro now became the governor, his first Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Michelle Henry, I believe will be taking the AG spot on the Board of Pardons. So we have the Lieutenant Governor, we have the Attorney General, we have Clarence Gubernick from the Department of Corrections, we have Dr. Williams, and we have the Victim Witness Advocate, all sitting comprising the 5 members of the Board of Pardons. Currently, they have public hearings. The public hearings are the ones where people do Zoom interviews if they're invited, because they earlier at the merit review, they got at least 2 out of the 5 votes. They're invited to a public hearing. The public hearings are scheduled for May 17th, May 18th, June 14th, 15th, and 16th of 2023. The merit reviews, which is when the board meets privately in order to decide how many applications to push forward, the merit reviews are currently scheduled for April 6th and July 6th. So that's my update about the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons and their agenda for at least the next 4 or 5 months. I've been asked where people get stuck in the pardon and expungement process. And the answer is they can get stuck at any point along the way. And it's a real issue because I know the people that contact me have a conviction or something that's affecting their quality of life. I have even researched their record, and I've sent them a copy of their record and told them what can be cleared by a pardon or an expungement. So I know that their life is being jeopardized and diminished by these convictions or records. I know I have their record, I've sent it to them, and then they just fall off the face of the earth. I don't know what they're dealing with. I know they're dealing with diminished income, challenges with housing, education, and employment, but I don't know how to help. I know they need the service, I don't know how to help. Sometimes I can see the people sort of in my queue. I can see that they're still getting, maybe they watch the podcast, maybe they read a smart mail now and then from my email platform. I'm guessing, I have to assume, is money the problem? Is employment the problem? Is the time the problem? Because there isn't any way to speed it up. But then again, if you've already waited long enough, you got to get in the queue. You got to get it started. And so if you give me information about where you're stuck, I can't fix everything, but I'm willing to take a look at resources and try to figure out what I can help, because you're not the only one. There are hundreds of thousands of people out there struggling with these criminal convictions. They all get stuck. My company and my website is committed to helping people overcome disabilities from Pennsylvania criminal convictions. And if you can tell me where you're stuck, maybe an opportunity will provide itself. I'm going to cruise through some topics that I've been given about questions and people that are searching for answers to a variety of different things. These topics might end up being longer content later on, but for right now, I just want to address the questions and at least give a short answer so that we can address the issues raised by the question. And so, one of the questions, a lot of questions that come in have to do with marijuana convictions. And I think that question has to do with how are marijuana convictions different from any other kind of convictions. And the only answer is, if your conviction is only marijuana related, whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor, the process is still the same, the explanation of how the crime occurred still takes place, the explanation of what you've done with your life since then is still the same. It's just that when we file it with the Board of Pardons, they have been expediting the review of marijuana-only related cases to review them in as little as a year instead of the normal 2 years. So that is the only difference. There's also probably slightly less investigation that goes into them, although your entire record will still be considered. But for somebody with a simple possession or marijuana-only related case, the answer is it could be reviewed in as little as a year instead of the normal 2 years, but you still need to get in line. Also, people need to remember that if you have any unrelated charges on the same docket that you were convicted of, so maybe you possess marijuana, but you also possess some pills or some opiates, that's going to kick it off the expedited track, and it'll just get moved administratively into the 2-year review process. The marijuana convictions are really for exclusively only marijuana-related criminal dockets and convictions. So those are my thoughts about marijuana convictions. I've also been asked, how many felonies can you get expunged? And I smile, it drives me nuts. I'm gonna help to teach people, because even people that I have filed for pardons for, like we're in the middle of the 2-year process to get their record pardoned so that it can be expunged. And they call me up and they say, Walmer, how's my expungement? There's pardons that give you official permission to expunge the record that are required for every felony and misdemeanor conviction. Expungements are the last process that are filed in the county of conviction to actually get a court order to clear the criminal record. So you can't expunge something if it's a conviction until it's been pardoned. So how many felonies can you get expunged turns into my question, how many felonies can be pardoned? I think that's what they're asking. And the answer is that based on when the crimes occurred, what was involved at the time of the crimes, and what you've done with your life since then, there's no limit to the number of felonies that can be pardoned or requested on an application. In fact, I think the board and everyone else in the system is quite used to a typical explanation, which is, I was a young knucklehead, or I got addicted to drugs or alcohol. I engaged in a series of crimes during that period of addiction or floundering, and then after a certain period of time, I cleaned up my act and I settled down and I started trying to get employment, and now it's been 5 or 10 years and these records are really holding me back. So the number of felonies, the number of misdemeanor convictions is not as important as what you've done with your life since then and how you explain the crimes that happened back in the day. I received a question about how do I know if my record has been expunged in Pennsylvania? And this is going to be a tricky answer, but stick with me. The first thing you do is go to the UJS portal to search for a public record. I have the address on my website. I can send it to you in an email. I just type in UJS portal and go to search for my name and date of birth and see what pops up. The question here is, how do I see if my record is expunged? So if you're searching the UJS portal and your record comes up, it has not been expunged. Now you know what it is you're trying to clear. If it doesn't show up on the UJS portal, does that mean that it's been expunged? No. It could have been sealed by the clean slate algorithm, meaning that it's hidden, but it's still there to be used against you. Or frequently, there's so many typos that happen with people's names or even dates of birth that it could still be out there. So my solution as recorderaser.net to how do I know when my record has been expunged is I have a service where for $100 I'll write off to the Pennsylvania State Police and request your full access review, which will scratch out every criminal conviction that you have in Pennsylvania. If it shows up on that full access review, then it has not been expunged. If it doesn't show up on that full access review, then it might have been expunged, or at least we would assume that it's been expunged. Most counties in Pennsylvania don't expunge their own records if they're eligible. Like if somebody gets a DUI and they go into the ARD program, some counties expunge their own ARDs, but they're very, very few. Also, juvenile records. Some counties will actually expunge a juvenile record on their own. Most counties won't, and so you never know which. By the way, juvenile expungements, if they're felonies, will show up on the Pennsylvania State Police Full Access Review. Misdemeanor juvenile adjudications will probably not, and we would need to request those records from the clerks of courts in the county of adjudication. Here's a related question that has to do with, if my record has been sealed, does that mean it's expunged and I don't need to disclose it anymore? The record sealing algorithm takes very small misdemeanors and summary offenses that are over 5 years old and hides them in certain situations. Those records are still available, and depending on whether they're a misdemeanor conviction or a summary conviction, they could still show up on an employer's request for a background. They could still show up on FBI records. They could still show up from the Pennsylvania State Police. So just because a record is sealed does not mean that it has been expunged. They've got to be scraped out, they've got to be disclosed, and then we can tell how to get rid of them through the filing of a pardon application or an expungement petition. Will a juvenile record show up on my background check? When I listen to this as a lawyer, of course the answer is always it depends, but what I'm hearing is, will a juvenile adjudication show up on different background checks depending on who's asking for a record from where? In general, juvenile adjudications do not show up, especially if they're misdemeanor adjudications. However, if you're over the age of 14 or 15 when the crime occurred, and if you have a felony offense or a felony adjudication for a serious crime, those will still show up on Pennsylvania State Police records and also the FBI records. So depending on the severity of the offense, they are still allowed to be included on background checks. Now, the related question about background checks is, what kind of background checks is an employer using? Are they using background.com? Are they using an FBI record? Are they requesting Pennsylvania State Police records? I don't know. You don't know. But the answer is juvenile felonies can show up forever. How are they cleared? Juvenile adjudications can be petitioned in the county of conviction to remove them after somebody has been over the age of 18 and they've been out of trouble for over 5 years. I'd be glad to search the records, try to find them, and advise you on whether you're a good candidate to get a juvenile record expunged. What felonies cannot be expunged? We're back to expunging felonies. You can't expunge a felony till it's been pardoned by the governor. But what felonies can you not ask to have forgiven? There's no answer. Pardon applications are filed for people sitting in prison, serving long sentences. So those would be sentences for murder, aggravated assault, drug dealing, rape, arson, kidnapping. They're probably serving a very long sentence of maybe 10 or 20 years or even more. But they can they can file a pardon application to help the governor review their case to see if they can get the same votes from the Board of Pardons that everybody else needs to get. My practice is limited to helping citizens who have Pennsylvania criminal records that are not incarcerated, but are struggling with old Pennsylvania convictions from the past. And so with regards to that, there is no limit to either the kind of felony or the kind of charge or the number of charge that you petition the governor and the Board of Pardons to review. It's a question of how do you explain the crime that occurred, what have you done with your life since then, and why are you a good candidate to convince the board that you should have your record recommended to the governor and the governor should pardon your offense. Once the governor pardons your offense, then you need expungements in each county of conviction where the records came from. So I've been asked, do I have to disclose a misdemeanor after 7 years? The answer is it depends on exactly what question you're answering. If the question is, have you ever been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor, then yes, I think you have to disclose it if you've been convicted of a felony or a misdemeanor. There is no magic number to 7 years. As a lawyer, when I hear 7 years, what I'm thinking is that's how long a bankruptcy stays on your record. And I also think there's certain credit history requests or things for the Fair Credit Act that drop off after 7 years. But in terms of criminal records, there's no 7-year magic mark that does anything to anything. There's basically a criminal conviction that will stay there basically forever. And then there's the clean slate algorithm, which is going to hide certain things after 10 years or summary offenses after 5 years. And so even if it hides them, they're not expunged, they're not gone, and it doesn't change your duty to disclose. And so that's the answer to that question. I've also been asked, what is a commutation? The three words pardon, commutation, and clemency all travel around together, and they're all part of the same process. A clemency application is the same as a pardon application that's filed before the Pennsylvania Board of Pardons, reviewed by the 5 board members of the Board of Pardons, and ultimately, hopefully, recommended to the governor with a recommendation that he issue a pardon and then the governor's issuance of a pardon. And after the pardon is issued, then you need an expungement. Okay, so clemency is basically an old word that means mercy or forgiveness. And so a clemency application is the same as asking the governor's Board of Pardons for a pardon. A commutation is a special kind of pardon application that's filed for people that are incarcerated and serving lengthy prison sentences that want to have their prison sentences shortened or commuted to a shorter period of time. So if somebody's serving a 15 to 30 year sentence for some kind of crime and they have some basis for saying that they've been in jail now 10 years or 15 years, they're not all released at their minimum, and sometimes they want to file a pardon or a commutation application to ask the governor to consider shortening their sentence, maybe out of medical necessity, maybe they're in decline. Commutation sentences are frequently filed for people that are serving life sentences for murder or some version of homicide, and that's the whole purpose to a commutation. All other kinds of pardon applications are basically just pardon applications to try to clear misdemeanor and felony convictions in Pennsylvania. So I've also become aware that lawyers use language, and that some of the terms that I use and just rattle off and buzz through as we do these videos are words that people either never heard before. If they heard them, it was in the process of a criminal conviction where everything is happening really fast, and maybe you don't know what your lawyer said, or maybe you just picked up on the gist of it, but you don't really know what's going on. And so I'm going to do short sections called glossary or definitions, so people can start becoming familiar with all the language that's used from the beginning when we start searching for a criminal record, to reviewing a criminal record to see what can be cleared and when, and then to the actual filing of a pardon application or an expungement petition. So a lot of the times, the beginning of a case comes down when the police are investigating a crime and they're actually typing up a police report and they're asking the district justice office to issue a criminal complaint. They're asking to either have a bench warrant issued or a summons to ask somebody to come to court. And when the district justice dockets that criminal information, it creates a docket number. The docket number is usually something like CP-36-1234-2005. It's not a mystery to the system about what these numbers are. CP refers to the county of charge, which 36 is Lancaster. Any designation about CR means that it's a criminal charge. And then the docket number that follows that is simply the specific criminal instance that is being issued, where the police are going to come and say, this is what happened on such and such a date. This docket number will always travel with that criminal charge. So there's a similar term called OTN, and OTN stands for offense tracking number. The offense tracking number, which has a similar kind of issuance, it actually usually starts with some letter, and then it's followed by 6 digits and a dash and a 7th digit, something like T1234556-6. That OTN is assigned to a criminal instance. It goes into the MDJ docket system, and the MDJ, that's the Magisterial District Justice or District Magistrate, issues an MJ number. So it's the same as the CP number, except this one is at the Magisterial District. It usually starts off with something like MJ dash, the MJ number dash, CR for a crime, or NT for non-traffic, and then whatever number follows that. So this can be confusing, but basically the OTN tracks the offense. The offense goes into the district justice office where it's given an MJ number, and if a preliminary hearing is held and the case is transferred from the magisterial district court to the court of common pleas, then at that level it's given a CP number. So an OTN goes to become a magisterial district court docket number, which then becomes a CP docket number, and that's how cases are tracked throughout the research, the investigation, and the criminal record.